The next witness is Mr. Victor Boyd.
Yeah, it should be okay. Okay. All right.
Just when you're ready, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you tell the Commission your full name and occupation?
Yeah. I'm a small business owner. My name is Victor Kenneth Boyd. I live in Auckland on the North Shore.
And you've made a statement to the Commission dated 27 April 2021. Do you confirm that statement is true and correct?
Yes.
I'm going to refer you to various paragraphs of your statement for you to speak to.
Okay.
And can I just interrupt briefly and say what I've said to many witnesses, that we have your statements, we've read them, and even if you're not referred to parts of them, they're very much in our minds. So for ease and time, we'll probably be skipping over some, but that's not to say that it's not noticed and understood. Thank you, Ms. Green.
Please tell the Commission about your involvement with CCHR, and I'm referring you to your first paragraphs in your statement, 1 to 14.
Right. Well, I started this quest, if you like, when I was 26 years old in 1977. I lived about a half an hour car drive from where Lake Alice was. And as it turned out, when the case of the New Iron Boy hit the headlines, because it was close to Wanganui, the Wanganui newspapers certainly covered it, and I was part of one of the protests down there at Lake Alice. My workmates knew that I'd done this, and one of them said to me, that guy in dispatch, he's been in Lake Alice. So what I did was I asked him a couple of questions and asked for an interview from him. He was only 18, and he gave me an interview, and I got an affidavit from of his experiences of what it was like at Lake Alice. And he gave me several names for me to contact of other boys who'd been in Lake Alice. Now, what I did was I searched and found, basically just hunted them down and said, look, you know, what I'm trying to do here, we're all volunteers in CCHR. I wasn't part of the system. I'm here to do research on what happened at Lake Alice. I'd like to hear your experiences. And this is basically how I approached the 30-odd patients that I've interviewed. Now, in 1977, I interviewed 5 of the boys who'd been in Lake Alice and got affidavits from them of their experiences. They really spoke of the painful injections and electric shocks, which they thought were unwarranted. 2 survivors talked of electric shocks to the genitals. We are now aware of 11 survivors who speak of this. So that was my beginnings.
If we can just have an overhead up,
Yeah.
It's 514003. Now, can you see that document in front of you, the Mental Health Declaration of Human Rights, and you refer to that in your statement at paragraph 8. Do you want to make a brief statement to the Commission about your purpose or CCHR's purpose? What was driving you, if you like, in reference to the declaration that's on the screen, if you can see it?
Well, the Declaration of Human Rights has been put together from the experience of CCHRs overseas because they had more experience with mental patients' rights and some abuses than we had in New Zealand, because New Zealand just started this in 1976. So that's basically the impetus behind the Declaration of Human Rights.
And do you still, this is still a driving belief for you?
Yes, it has a lot of aspects to that which we, I think, need to be put into New Zealand, particularly after what we've uncovered with Lake Alice over the years.
I now refer you to paragraphs 15 to 20 of your statement, where you talk about Mr. Ray Limpus, and I'm going to ask that his statement be put overhead. It's 514004.
Right.
And I wonder if
Sorry.
you could tell the Commission about your dealings with Mr. Limpus.
Well, with Ray Limpus, who's passed away now, but I knew him as an acquaintance, and when he knew that I was looking at Lake Alice as a hospital and what was going on there, he was a teacher at Holdsworth School, which we have heard a bit about, and he was just told me a few of the events, and one of the events was one of the boys he was looking after was the housemaster said we're taking him out to go to the dentist. But 2 or 3 days later he returned, and Ray looked in his file and he found that he'd been to Lake Alice and had shock treatment, ECT. That was a concern to Ray, and he did a statement for us of his experiences as a teacher.
What's the date of that statement? Can you see there?
You can, that can be highlighted and magnified if you wish, any particular parts.
I think it would be good for the Commission to just know the date.
Yes, so
Of the-
is it at the top or the bottom?
Must be at the bottom.
No.
I don't think we've got the signing page.
Here we go.
Oh,
There it
here we
is.
are. Here we
There
are.
it is.
Yes. The 20th of December 1977.
77. Yeah.
Please tell the Commission about you facilitating a boy making a complaint to the Director General of Mental Health, and that's in paragraphs 32 to 41 of your statement.
Right, well, another boy I found out about, I located him from Wellington, and I went and asked if I could speak to him, and he said yes. Now, what he was about, he told me later on that he'd spoken to his mother about what events occurred to him at Lake Alice, and his mother had said, "They're not allowed to do that, son." And when I came to see him and spoke with him, he was very impressed. He told me later he felt someone cared about what happened to us boys at Lake Alice, as he put it. So after that, I kind of lost contact with him, as I do with some of the others, because they're pretty transient people sometimes. He told me he made a complaint to the Director General of Mental Health off his own bat. So when I was interviewing him, he described several incidents of the shock that was applied to children and himself, which were quite outlandish, I thought. And one of them, the main one I thought, was where he described, see at Lake Alice, unfortunately they had a boy in there who had known sexual preferences, shall we say, and he was sent to Lake Alice from a boys' home, and he was allowed to mix with other boys, and the staff found out after about 5 months that he'd sodomised 5 of the other boys in there. And this particular survivor told me where he was invited to turn the dial of the shock machine, because there was a special session set up where it was a punishment session where they were allowed to get their own back on this boy who had sodomised them by giving electric shocks. And this affected this survivor, and he was certainly part of the complaint that he made to the Director General of Mental Health. Now, what happened there was we found out sometime later that the complaint went to the was passed on by the Director General of Mental Health to the Medical Association, who looked at the complaint and consulted with several psychiatrists about the allegations, and they wrote to Dr Leeks and said, well, we're not happy about this. You're using the shock machine in a punishing situation, and we think this is likely to bring the profession into disrepute. Now, we found out later that they communicated with Dr Leeks, and Dr Leeks wrote back to the Medical Association, and he said, no, you are wrong and I am right. And he basically told them, well, you know, I'm a psychiatrist, and I know what I'm doing, and that's that. So the Medical Association was not happy. They wrote to the Medical Council. The Medical Council, in 1977, all this is, the Medical Council wrote to Dr Leeks saying, well, you know, you've been found guilty of unprofessional conduct in a professional respect. Dr Leeks wrote to the Medical Council and he said, no, you Medical Council are wrong and I am right. And they're happy with this, so they set a date for a hearing, but unfortunately for one and all, the outcome of that hearing is not able to be located by the council or by ourselves. So Dr Leeks was not censured. The complainant was given no information about what happened, and Dr Leeks continued to practice in Australia with a certificate of good standing from the Medical Council.
So just taking you on to paragraph 44 of your statement, what do you remember of the police investigation where you supported the boys to make complaints?
Right. Well, there essentially were three investigations in 1978 which caught the attention of media and myself, and they looked serious investigations. The magisterial inquiry, the Ombudsman inquiry, and the police investigation. Now, the magisterial inquiry was looking at one boy, the Ombudsman inquiry looked at one boy, and the police investigation looked at two boys, the complaints of those people. So there was four boys, and we in CCHR thought, well, is there any more to this? And because I was in Wanganui at the time, living in Wanganui, I was kind of asked and kind of volunteered to scout around a bit more to see what there was about Lake Alice, if there was anything more. So I basically, in those days, you had to do everything yourself. There were no laptops and no cell phones. And I scouted around and found further survivors and got their story. So what we were doing in CCHR, we were trying to put a bigger picture together, if there was one, than what these inquiries were looking at. So that's most of sort of the work that I had done usually in the 70s.
I thought it might be helpful for the Commission to have a summary of CCHR involvement from 1977 to 1979. And if you can put up the witness statement, it's 14001. Paragraph 55. So I thought you might like to just take a journey down that decade and just highlight the important things. It should be on your screen there or on your in your statement.
Okay. Well, I'm just looking a bit ahead here actually to 1991. We've covered the inquiries that occurred through 77. In very general terms, because this is all the time I've got here. But in 1991, just moving forward just a shade, CCHR helped with a complaint to the Medical Practitioners Disciplinary Committee of another survivor. He pointed out in his complaint that the Medical Council may already have information on Lake Alice. Now, the chairman, Dr Williams, he determined from this complaint, quote, "There are no grounds for an inquiry into the conduct of Dr Leeks," end quote. And we thought that this was another chance to uncover the systemic abuse that looked like was unfolding here.
All right, well, we'll move on. Now, if we go to the first class action, and that's at paragraph 76 to 78 of your statement, what would you like to say to the Commission about that?
Okay. Well, there was momentum building. The survivors that we could contact, and there were other survivors because they were getting older and somewhat, shall we say, a little braver. Essentially what happened was that there was a law firm in Christchurch, Grant Cameron Associates, who started putting a class action together of cases which had been supplied to him. We supplied the affidavits from 1977, which showed that what he was encountering in 1999 with the survivors, they were saying the same things then as what they said in 1977. And this was a help with the credibility for his class action. So he was putting those together, but from 1997 he was a catalyst in generating more media in Australia and New Zealand, and in April of 1999 he filed in the High Court in Wellington the first 56 cases that he'd put together of an eventual 85. It needs to be spoken that in the same year that he'd filed those cases, Dr Leeks cancelled his registration with the Medical Council in New Zealand, which meant that the New Zealand Medical Council would say later on that he's no longer in our jurisdiction, we won't investigate him.
Can I take you on to paragraph 80 to 83 of your statement?
Right.
What happened as a result of the class action from your perspective?
We thought this was very significant. It was the class action by Grant Cameron Associates resulted in a government apology and ex gratia payouts to the victims. In 2001, there were 85 individuals, $6.5 million. Now, when we talk about ex gratia payments, we're talking about like a gift. And the government made it very clear that they sincerely apologised to the survivors, and we thought that was magnificent. But they also said these payouts means we're not accepting any legal liability whatsoever for this. And the Minister of Health sent out a press release where she said many children should never have been in Lake Alice. Some were put in there because there was nowhere else for them to go. But with the outcome of this civil suit, no one was held to account, no one censured. There was no demand for any police investigation or any investigation by a responsible authority, and the survivors were told to go to the police if they want to go further. But some may have been reluctant to do this, and some may have had no knowledge of how to do this. So at that stage we helped 6 complainants take complaints to the police.
Now, the next significant event was the Gallen report, and you talked about that at paragraph 84 to 89 of your statement. And can you summarise what you understood was achieved by the Gallen report?
Well, this was really the first look at a large group of the survivors, not just 1 or 2 individuals. It gave a real insight into events of Lake Alice. Sir Rodney Gallen, the retired High Court judge who wrote the report, was appalled and went beyond his brief to write this report. The government unfortunately challenged it being made public, but that got overruled. And he described incidents of seclusion, electric shocks and children in terror at the treatment they were receiving at the hands of the staff, not just the psychiatrists, but the staff at Lake Alice. So from this, of course, the payouts from Lake Alice increased as of 2009. There were 195 claimants for the payouts, and the government's paid out $12.8 million of taxpayers' money without any accountability for that.
An overhead is going to appear now, I hope, and that is a press article dated 2001, Children Wept in Terror, October 2001. Is that the publicity that the government did not want at the time?
Yes, the Gallup report was quite graphic and described in general terms, but and there was detail in there. What I'm saying is, in general terms, I mean there were no names mentioned. It was done in proper confidentiality, but it described the events of what the staff were doing at Lake Alice to the children.
Now, the police investigation occurred from 2002 to 2010, and you cover that in paragraph 93 to 103 of your statement. Can you summarise the important points from your point of view about the police investigation?
Well, we look at this one here. CCHR knew of 9 complainants who were never interviewed by the police as part of their investigation of criminal misconduct. We now know there were 41 who were not interviewed by the police. We also know that there was a statement in a police job sheet where a registered nurse stated they had witnessed a boy being shot on the genitals and thighs, and ECT was used as a punishment. We thought that is highly significant coming from a registered nurse at Lake Alice. So the police also got an expert opinion from Professor Walter, who was an Australian psychiatrist, and I'll just read out that. It's only a paragraph of what he provided to the police. So here was the quote. In summary, Dr Leeks' treatments appeared to depart significantly from the standards of the day. This was in the areas of his direct clinical care, including his method of use of electrical treatments and his dubious reasons for some of those treatments, his level of supervision of staff, including the various treatments used by those staff, and his documentation, the last even by 1970 standards. It's worth adding that it appears difficult to ascertain what governed Dr Leeks' decision-making, example, when to give patients modified versus unmodified ECT, not that the latter is ever medically indicated, end of the quote. So the outcome of that investigation, there was no criminal prosecution concerning any of the staff.
Now, next you followed the Medical Practitioners Board of Victoria investigation between 2003 to 2006, and that's at paragraphs 158 to 176 of your statement, and I'll get an overhead on the board. It's 14058. Can you take the Commission through that Medical Practitioners Board of Victoria, MPBV?
Yes. All right. We thought, because Dr Leeks was practising in Australia at the time, we forwarded several complaints to the Medical Practitioners Board, as did Grant Cameron Associates, and they thought enough of it to do an investigation into the conduct of Dr Leeks. Although he was practising in Australia, they were looking solely at what he'd done, what he was doing at Lake Alice in the 70s. So they hired a law firm, Minter Ellison, who came to New Zealand to interview CCHR and survivors, and they wanted an affidavit from me that the interviews that I'd done in 1977 were true. We in CCHR gave the medical board all the information we could, and the medical board investigated, and they compiled 39 charges against Dr Leeks of infamous conduct in a professional respect. His conduct was seen as not having an adequate medical basis. So what follows is just a few sentences of the book of evidence that the board compiled, which they presented to Dr Leeks and his lawyers. And these were 15 counts of administering electric shocks to the temples without anaesthetic, 15 counts of administering electric shocks to the temples without anaesthetic and without consent, 2 counts of permitting adolescent patients to administer electric shocks to another patient, 3 counts of administering electric shocks to the genitals, and 4 counts of administering electric shocks to the hands, thighs and shoulders without anaesthetic. So it was extremely disappointing to the survivors who we were working with that Dr Leeks avoided accountability by resigning. He was not censured, actions were not referred to the police, and once again not held accountable, even though the charges were not taken away.
How did you and CCHR respond to this result?
Well,
I'm referring you to paragraph 170 to 176 of your statement.
All right. Well, one of the things that I did was I wrote to the Royal Australian New Zealand College of Psychiatrists to do with what we should do now. Were they concerned about the fact that here was this culture at this hospital, just because the psychiatrist had resigned? What about the culture of the staff who needed to be corrected because to all intents and purposes what they understood was happening at Lake Alice was correct. So the Royal College said, well, I can write to the Medical Council of New Zealand. So I wrote to the Medical Council of New Zealand, and the council said, we will not investigate because Dr Leeks is no longer in our jurisdiction. Now, I also went to see my local Member of Parliament, Dr Wayne Mapp, and we put together some questions of Dr Wayne Mapp at that time was in opposition, so he was happy to write to the Minister of Health, and he asked the Minister of Health if they are providing the medical board with any assistance. Now, this was all going on at the same time as the medical board was doing its investigation, and as you can tell, the police were also investigating, but the Minister of Health wrote back, and here's the quote for that, which is just a paragraph, and he wrote, I am advised that neither the Ministry of Health nor other state entity for which redacted responsible is providing any advice, inquiries or assistance in respect of the investigation being undertaken by the Medical Practitioners Board of Victoria in relation to Dr Selwyn Leeks.
And what did you do following that? And I refer to paragraph 177 and 178 of your statement.
Well, it was extremely disappointing to us working with the survivors that we were seeking some accountability and responsibility for what happened, and we looked at the United Nations, what options there were there. We discovered that non-government organisations could make submissions under the United Nations periodic reviews. So the UN reviews what the New Zealand government does every 4 years as part of the contracts. It basically says, well, what have you been doing, New Zealand, about this and that? And New Zealand had to respond. So I helped draft the first of 2 reports went to the United Nations, and they came back wanting the government to do small things when the government didn't do anything about that. So this went on to about 2000, from 2010 to around 2015, and I helped one of the complainants, Paul Zenfield, make a complaint to the United Nations. Working with CCHR, we put that together, and the UN upheld the complaint, which is an extremely rare thing, we found out. So this event going to the United Nations and the complaint being upheld is covered by Mike Ferris shortly.
Thank you for that. If we can now, and you've made some recommendations in your statement, and they're going to appear on the board, and you might like to speak to them. That's at paragraph 182, 183 and 184.
Right. To give a very brief summary of this, in light of the cruel and inhumane abuses that occurred at Lake Alice, there needs to be real change to ensure such things do not occur in the future. One of the key issues was how a psychiatrist in good standing with a practicing certificate and registered with the Medical Council was able to do what he did without anyone within his profession stopping him. We believe that one of the reasons is that psychiatry operates above the law in several ways, which is why a psychiatric practitioner can detain and treat someone against their will, and Dr Leeks took advantage of this.
Thank you. That concludes that statement.
Thank you, Mr Gibson.
Mr Boyd.
Oh, sorry, Mr Boyd.
Boyd. And the
Beg your
next,
pardon.